So, hey, Bart, thanks so much for joining me today, Silicon Heartland Sessions. You know, they say that in order to do something like really well, you have to do it like 10,000 times. Well, this is my third time doing an interview. So
Yeah, it's 10,000
ex-
hours. So at least if you're, an hour in, you do it 10,000 times.
right, right. So expectations low, but I'm really, really glad to have you. So why don't we talk a bit about your career journey? You're the CTIO for OCLC, and if we could just briefly share with us your journey. How did you get to where you're at today?
Well, I recently gave a presentation a little bit on this too. So the early part of my career, we'll start there and then sort of end at OCLC. The early part of my career was spent, as I think most people spent it, in the late 90s, which was in consulting. So, as an engineer in college, didn't really know what I wanted to do for work. Ended up interviewing at quite a few places and decided both on base what I wanted to do from a technical perspective and what I really didn't want to do, like investment banking in New York or some other opportunities in Boston, also based on location. So I landed in Washington, D.C., from where I went to school in Philadelphia to work for what at the time was called AMS, which is now called CGI. And really, there's several sort of large consulting firms that, to be honest, I think are a really good landing spot for people right out of college who want to learn about the field, specifically the field of technology. It's such a broad field. It's in so many industries. I started in the telecom industry that blew up fairly quickly and ended up moving into human services group, and went from being in a project that was going to be international to flying to Columbus, Ohio. To be That's how I started understanding and landing here in Columbus. So I
What year
did
was that, by the
consulting,
way?
and I think what's that?
What year was that? Just curious.
So that was in '97. So, and
Awesome.
I've been sort of flew to Ohio from '97 to almost 2002, and then eventually moved here because there was so much opportunity, particularly in the field of technology and technology consulting. And there were a wide range of industries that are supported here in Columbus. So, from that perspective, it was a great, really, just a lucky place to land right out of school. Growing up in Nebraska, I wasn't looking to move back to what I guess some folks term here Midwest. It's not that Midwest. I would argue Nebraska is much different than Columbus, Ohio, but it is different than the edge that I felt at sometimes in the East Coast. So it was a good sort of mix of commerce, culture, growth and opportunity, particularly in technology. So, but the whole start of my career was doing technology consulting and really on large engagements where you have opportunities in large projects to move up quickly if you want to put the work in. Did consulting, and I got some sort of lessons learned from those days. You end up starting to fly around a lot. Even when I moved here to go work for a company called Covansis at the time, another sort of regional, starting to grow to be, it was probably even larger than regional, national, and they did have some business, probably even overseas type of business. It eventually it got bought by several companies. And the reason I did that was to get off of traveling as well, and then when I moved here and got married and started having children, it became evident that it's difficult to work at those large consulting companies and have somewhat of a family life. It's not impossible, and there's certainly a lot of partners and other people that move up that track, but it's a pretty significant strain on your time doing both billable work and all the work that's needed to actually build the business. And the reason I liked consulting at a young age is because you learn both sides. You don't have to, but those that get advanced and get ahead at places like a management consulting or other IT consulting have to work both on their day job, if you will, typically at a client site, and then you have to build the business, whether that's proposal writing, RFPs, presentations, other
Hmm.
things, networking, community.
So
So there's a
sounds
lot of
like
time spent, and when you're early in your career, I think that's an easier thing to do.
Yeah, I hear you. I hear you. But it sounds to me like the advantage that you have is, it gives you not only an opportunity to sort of grow your technology skills. You have to be able to understand the technology, but it also gives you an opportunity to be able to communicate those ideas and so forth in business terms to your customers and clients and so forth. Plus, I imagine in consulting, you get a wide range of industries that you give visibility into.
Yeah, you nailed it. So I think, if I was advocating for someone who doesn't know what they want to do, in particular, whether it's technology industry or even type of role, those are great places to start because, you can do many different roles on different projects and they give you the leeway and give you the training support. And they just have an infrastructure built to bring in college grads that's different than some mid-market companies. Now, my guess is Chase does very well with that as well, but they're like a big company. Some of these firms have, hundreds of thousands of employees. So I found it to be a great career path to start. But once I started, traveling a lot for that company and seeing that I may be away for very long periods of time for different types of engagements, projects that you win, very large engagements, large projects that require, multi-year commitments. I went more boutique, and that's where I went boutique, still consulting, but helping start a solutions practice at Quick Solutions. At the time, it was called Quick Solutions, and that was really a conscious decision and a step back a little bit, from of the work I was doing. A few things drove me there. One was, um, this is back in, again, the early 2000s, people were still
Exciting
heavily
times,
invested in
man.
waterfall.
Mm-hmm.
It was really frustrating me that, we'd get done with a 3-year waterfall project. Nothing was done right, which is true for any software project. All of a sudden we get in this war room and we're in a war room for almost 6 months, with our client, with people, technical people, not everybody, but a good portion of the management structure. And we'd be in there for 6 months normalizing this thing in production. And that felt like,
No
wow,
kidding.
if we could just get into a better rhythm from the start of an engagement. So, I sort of got big into Agile and other methodologies that I would have felt would be a better way to build software, and had a chance with the solutions practice with Quick to go and basically prove that out. That was the de facto way in which they wanted to deliver. It was smaller teams, more effective. I wasn't doing maybe large engagements, but still very meaningful work. It also got me sort of engaged in the Columbus community because although I worked here for a number of years, I really didn't know a ton of people outside of the people that I directly worked with. You got some aspect of knowing different companies, but most of the time when I didn't live here, I'd fly back to DC or go somewhere else. So I wanted to sort of start planting a flag and start really understanding and working with various commercial companies here, different industries, and that held true on that consulting side. And I did that for a number of years and helped them build up a business along with others that became pretty effective in Columbus. It was well known, had good engineers, had good delivery projects, and we did some real neat work for some different clients. So, and then, after that was probably about maybe the first 15 years of my career,
Mm-hmm.
13, 14 years. And then I, thankfully, because of the network I had built, I had an opportunity to go in for my first CIO and CTO combined role. And that was with CareWorks Family Companies at the time. They're now under a different name, but and they had at the time, I believe, 6 companies, and their largest company had outsourced IT for since the beginning of the time, almost 18 years, I think, from when they were
Wow.
created.
Yeah.
And it was a complete outsourcing relationship. It wasn't outsourced from the standpoint of a different country. It was outsourced to a company out of Cleveland, but everything from the systems to the people to the network to the help desk to the application, you name it. Everything that ran the business from a technology perspective, desktop management was all outsourced. And that put them in a strategic disadvantage as a private company, looking at, hey, if we ever want to have an exit or merge up with another company, us not controlling our IT assets is now an issue, and helped us for a period of time. Wasn't that a good of a departing of ways? It was a very contentious, at times, disintegration, if you will.
Yeah.
of it. And so they brought me in to build up all of that. And we had to do that in a very short amount of time. So build all of our data centers network. There was like 3 or 4 mainframe applications into an entirely new application. Real hard work, and
I believe
be
it.
approved by our regulators on the first day of operating, or you're basically out of business in that world.
Yeah.
So a lot of time. That's where I spent. I think it was, I don't know how many days, but it was every day for many months. I worked every day for a very long period of time.
I believe it.
Definitely didn't see my family that often. They remember those days, my kids do. But based on the severity of the business and what needed to be done, it's what needed to be done, and it's why I
Yeah.
was brought in. Just didn't understand the dire nature of it, or you always underestimate a little bit of the effort involved and all the outside factors that you have to manage and get through. So
Yeah.
that was my first foray of getting into an internal role, and it was certainly baptism by fire.
Hell yeah. Yeah. Hell yeah. I would imagine. I mean, when I think about your journey, your unique journey, the words that come to my mind are, learning having a solid foundation, obviously number one, in work ethic. And then number two, I think there's an element of resilience there as well. I would imagine there were some really hard times, where you had to, balance out your professional obligations with your personal obligations, which isn't easy, especially, even when you're not traveling all over the place.
Yeah,
So
I mean, my family thought, well, you're in Columbus now. Why, you gone? And
yeah.
I think thankfully, I have a great, my wife understands what I do. She works very diligently and hard as well. That
Hmm.
helps.
Yeah.
I think that, to your point, uh, and this is not to say it's an old school way of thinking, but one of the sort of words of wisdom I try to give out to people is, I remember, particularly back in the day when I started consulting, you had a bunch of really smart people giving you a lot of cliched responses. And I used to always get, hey, Bart, remember, you need to work smarter, not harder. And
I've
this
heard
goes
that.
back a little bit to even yeah, and this is what you talked about even at the beginning. And I said, well, what makes you think I'm not doing both?
There you go.
And
Hell yeah.
just because I'm here, and particularly when you travel, why not put in the
Yeah.
time?
Yeah. These are
I
not
really
mutually
didn't have, there's other
exclusive.
things I did
Yeah.
socially, but I mean, my focus has been building my career, and that's a big part of what I want to accomplish in life. I know some others, don't value the same component, and that's okay. I'm not saying they all do, but if you want to be in this type of role, I think, and if you want to advance in organizations, you just mentioned the 10,000 hour rule. Like, what if I do more cycles of 10,000 hours than the person sitting next to me over the next
Yeah.
3 years?
There you go, man.
And we could be of the same level of intelligence, and
Hmm.
I would argue in many cases I worked with people a lot smarter than me. But are they going to put in the time to actually do the work and do what I call the grind of IT, which it is, and it's a
Yeah.
very thankless grind at times. Part of
Very
that goes
true.
back to my athletic upbringing, I guess, as well. But
Hmm.
I'm not afraid to put in the hours in order to get something done, and I'm not afraid of. I remember during that whole period of time, and it still happens to this day. The CEOs I work with at times get concerned, and they're like, "Are you okay? I know you've been working." And I always say, and it's not to be. I'm not trying to be arrogant in any way, but I'm built for this.
Yeah.
For whatever reason, I'm built for this
That.
profession. My
Yeah.
mindset is built for it. I don't get dismayed because I know things are going to be difficult and could be prolonged. And from that perspective, I think if you can accept it, you can manage through it. And I think, and as long as you can not have so many outside factors that end up being negatively impacted by the work, then I think you can do well. So not
Hell
everybody's
yeah.
in that situation. I'm not saying everybody should be, but it's one thing
Hmm.
that I think has helped me be successful, is to work both hard and smart. And sometimes, unfortunately, that means things after work. It means extra hours. It means doing some things on the weekend. It means working through the weekend. It means working through the night. And unfortunately, in our business of IT, we don't even get to choose those situations at times. In most cases, they're chosen for us,
Right.
which can be
Right.
very frustrating. So you have to somewhat accept it mentally so that you can work through it efficiently.
I love it, man. I think that's sage advice. I could imagine a t-shirt, talking about cliches. I mean, I think that that's really invaluable advice. Work smart and hard. And then what you said,
Yeah, do
really
both. I always,
yeah, do both, man. And then the
yeah,
other
I put the
thing,
slide up. It says work smarter, not harder, and just cross it out and say do both. Like, I
there you
think
go,
you need to
man.
do both. And
That
it's
that'd be
very
a perfect
interesting in the
t-shirt.
day of AI.
Hmm.
Yeah, the day of AI, right? The day of the pandemic, or as far as, this is where we're currently at. Everybody seems to think, well, I can get what I used to do in 8 hours and get it done in 3 hours and then go have my work-life balance. And that to me is extremely odd. It's not how I'm built. To me,
Yeah.
I'd want to get 12 hours of work done in 8 hours. And now I'm, efficient, not looking to cut my time at work. And I'm not trying to do it as a management,
Hmm.
saying, but like some people see efficiency and things as if then I can go and to me, I'm hired to work and I'm hired to work for a period of time. And certainly I work more hours than that, but my efficiency gain helps me only feel like I can make it even farther 10 years from now,
Right.
not only within my job. And if I'm doing well at my job, I feel I can do things outside of work in an efficient manner as well.
Yeah.
So
I hear you.
the mentality has to be from that perspective of getting more done. And so
Well,
that's really my
and
intent. And sometimes I have to
mhm.
grind through it and I'm very slow and methodical. I always remember, I was an engineer and fancied myself being smart, particularly growing up in Nebraska. And then I went to school and found out very quickly as a biomedical engineer, there were some people way smarter than me.
No
But I
kidding,
mean,
man.
leaps
Yeah.
and bounds. And, I'd listen to a lecture and, I afterwards, I'm like, I didn't get any of that. Person next to me, like I understood it all. Like, so
Right.
they were there. It took me maybe another 8 hours of reading the book, maybe listening to this or that for me to get it. So I've always been a diligent person, but I've always had to put in the time to
Yeah.
get there. I think I
I
can
hear you, man.
eventually get there from an intelligence perspective, but I'm not there immediately. So part of me, my learning style has been that sometimes I just have to somewhat grunt through it.
Yeah, and that's awesome, man. And the other thing you said that really
And it's still to
resonated,
this day.
I believe it. I believe it. Hell, I find myself in discussions to this day where I'm like, what the hell are we talking about? I got to go like Google,
Yeah.
acronyms and everything, which that's part of the gig. That's part of being in tech. Tech is moving so fast. But the
A
one the
lot of
one thing
smart
that I
people.
wanted to say that you really that really resonated with me as well, in your whole mantra of work hard and work smart. There's a tagline in there too, a subtext, and I wanted to get your opinion of this. But expect obstacles. Expect
Yeah.
it
I
to be
mean, yeah.
hard. Yeah.
You expect it
Hell
to be
yeah.
hard. I always say that, another little bit of a sports cliche. I don't know if it's necessarily that, but I gotta say, and some people don't like hearing this. Particularly, I remember when I went to a startup, I said you gotta like practice. And
Yeah.
the reason I state that is, I wrestled, but I also coached, and a big part of that sport is, it's not just the accolades of going to a meet or whether you win or lose. At least it's fun at a meet or your basketball game or like my daughter's lacrosse games. Games are great. And now certainly kids don't want to lose, but at least games are fun. You're
Yeah.
competing against somebody real time. Where most of your growth is not in those games, it's in practice. And
That's right, man.
so, and in practice is where you're going to have coaches ask you to do something that you don't think you can do because you're too tired. The same thing happens, but you almost have to be your own coach when you're in a career.
There you go, man.
You will find opportunities. I've been lucky enough to get good coached, as far as both managed and coached by really, really cerebral, well-mannered, intelligent people.
Hmm.
And I didn't necessarily have the whole time in coaching for wrestling. No, I did, but it's not just about yelling; it's about supporting, but it's also about pushing people hard and
Yeah.
you then figuring out how to push yourself. Because no matter what somebody externally can say to you, you know whether you can actually go and do more or whether you're just tired and trying to give up. So I do think in the work scenario, people give up more than they would if they were doing something for personal gain, let's say training for a marathon or if they met their own goal. And that's why people need to somewhat understand if you're training for a marathon, you're already going to be, I've never have, I certainly admire the people that have, there's
Hmm.
going to be major parts of that training that you're going to feel, you're going to get to that training point, you're going to want to quit.
This is
And it's
true.
only because you've set that
Yeah.
goal and you're holding yourself accountable, or you have a team of people that you're running with holding you accountable,
Yeah. Hell
that
yeah.
you're going to get through it, particularly if you're not a
Discipline.
runner. Like,
That's right.
I don't care if it's a half, whatever. So um,
Hell
it's
yeah, man.
just, you're going to need some coaches along the way. You're going to need some support along the way. But ultimately, what's inside you has to be what drives you. And, you got to have somewhat of that. I'm going to run into problems. And
Yeah.
not only that, I'm running into problems, and it may require me to do X to get through that wall.
I love it.
And
I
it
love
can't
it.
be, well, I'm just packing up for the night.
Yeah. And, and speaking, you mentioned growth and the importance of practice, and that's where growth happens. It can also be said that, the greatest growth happens when you fail, when you get your ass kicked,
Oh, yeah.
So are there obstacles, are there failures that you've had along your journey that have shaped who you are today that you
Yeah, I mean,
mentioned?
I've had many failures, particularly, I mean, you can't have that many when you do consulting. To be honest, your clients aren't all that happy with failure.
Right.
So you do your best to avoid, but there's always failure, and you just don't want it to equate to a failed project, right? To a failed
Very
outcome.
true. Yeah.
And so,
That's a really
but even
interesting point.
internal,
Failed
yeah,
outcomes. That's an interesting, take. Because I agree with you. You obviously you don't want to fail and like God forbid have like a breach or something like that, like a data breach or something like that. There are definitely different levels of failure. You're absolutely
well,
right.
and never waste a catastrophe either, because you learn even more in those where they are failed outcomes. And I've had several of those as well. Uh, I when you get into this type of role, and you're the lead person, and you have a great team, and you're building them up, there's always things you just don't know.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of my failures probably come from not asking the right questions, maybe not asking enough questions, maybe not having the right folks in the room. I always say trust but verify, but sometimes maybe trusting too broadly without understanding context. Another thing that I always talk about, that has helped me try to make less failures is, I always got this one too, particularly it's consulting speak as well. Hey, be more strategic. Don't get into the weeds. I used to
Mm-hmm.
get this all the time from
Hmm.
principals and people that want to give me their wisdom, and I just don't buy it, because I think to be strategic, sometimes you have to be in the weeds.
Yeah.
So
No
one of the
shit.
things that
I
I've
agree.
done to try to limit my failures, and really the team's failures and all of our failures, because it's not just it's me, it's misunderstanding, communication, it's not getting into the details. It's not asking the three more questions that you're curious about, but you're trying not to offend. But I just, you got to be curious enough to ask them, and you got to be, in my opinion, somewhat contextually technical enough to dig in to different areas of the business to understand where your next failure point is, or where certainly there's stress on the business. And I think a lot of people, again, don't want to do that work, or they don't feel they're an expert in that work. So, well, I'm an infrastructure person. I don't really know much about software development. Should I go challenge the software development, organization? Or I only know software development. I don't know much about infrastructure. We used to have CIOs used to be boxed into, well, that was an infrastructure background role, operations
Right.
only. And their skill set was lacking, in my opinion, and their ability to navigate to the other details, so much so that they created the CTO role to innovate and do software, other things. And then now
Yeah.
you have two people leading. It's like most of them are more than competent if given the opportunity to do both.
Yeah.
And really strategically, you need to be able to manage in both those areas, both on the operational improvement side. Probably your biggest margin play within any company is in that spot,
Mm-hmm.
and then on the innovation side to see how can you improve the ability to do software. Because no matter what business I've been in, and what role I've been in, software is never done fast enough. It's never done at the budget one would expect,
Mm-hmm.
and it's never having the full impact even on deployment that one would expect either. So there's always this desire to move faster and faster, get better at it, get more tighter at it, and those are really good expectations to have. So
I agree.
I think people
Well
have to
said.
get uncomfortable saying, I don't know about this, but I know enough to sit with somebody who's really good and ask good questions and read and go do the homework, and do it long enough to where then you can go in and make a better decision the next time around. Certainly don't let it catch you twice,
Yeah.
if it has. And, I try not to get caught twice. It happens at times still because it depends on the complexity of the environment, sort of the scale of the business. But that's my
Yeah.
goal on the sort of failure side.
Love it. Love it. So, thinking about kind of segueing maybe into, this whole concept of, you're going to find yourself in situations where you're not going to be the smartest person in the room. You're going to find yourself in
I hope.
situations where yeah, exactly. Yeah. I love it. And, one of the things that you said was, number one, being humble enough to be able to say, I don't know. And number two, knowing who to go talk to ask questions. I am curious, are there other techniques that you use to, sharpen the saw and stay up to speed on technologies outside of, like what you do on a day by day basis, like in the trenches?
Uh, I think part of what I do is I do try to go somewhat into the trenches in different areas that I'm not particularly at the level that I feel I should be to be effective in my role. And
Mm-hmm.
just fortunately, between, I mentioned CareWorks, and then I was with the Yorker Services Group, and then I was at a startup, and now I'm here at OCLC. They've all had their own mix of things that were just perfect timing. I'm very lucky. And that's part of, I think, anybody who feels they've advanced to a certain level. One, a lot of luck, certainly a lot of work, don't get me wrong, but
Mm-hmm.
luck and some good sort of decision making that, you look back, was it great or not? I wouldn't say great decision making, but on where I needed to, obtain some new skills. So
Right.
good example, we were working a lot. I went through the acquisition, then ran the larger company, even though we were acquired with between CareWorks and Yorker Services Group. But it was getting to be a grind. I ran a tech company for them too, and I was like, I really want to get into this cloud thing natively.
Mm-hmm.
I really want to understand it, because that's a separate sort of lesson learned I've had is, how do you manage through a hype cycle? That's a whole separate thing that I've learned how to do better. Um, and really
I
wanted
bet
to learn
it's,
about the native cloud.
yeah.
And so I went from managing a large team to just going to a startup with a very small team, small.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wanted to be immersed in everything with microservices. What is this about? How did things really scale? What's, the difference between the monolithic and this? And, what are
Right.
the concepts? And I felt the best way for me to learn, not only just because I felt it was the right time to do something like that, but just to immerse myself, and I don't think a lot of people would make that type of move. They wouldn't go from running a large organization down to like having, I think it was maybe six or seven
Mm-hmm.
direct reports. But it was a conscious decision because I really wanted to learn natively about the cloud. When I came here, we're a very large data shop. I've managed large data, but never a significantly large, Hadoop infrastructure that's built into the product that has search functionality as part of
Right.
a core element. And search hasn't really been a core element of any business I've been in. So those are areas where I've dug into. So to
That's
me, it's
awesome.
trying to round out my skills and be willing to go in. And in almost all cases, all those areas have problems. So if you can be part of the solution, I'm not there just to magnify the problem. I'm there to pick up a shovel as well. And I think that
Mm-hmm.
hopefully the teams I work with know that I'm not just going to try to manage through it. I'm trying to understand and get something done. Hand me something, I will get something done. I will do analysis. I will do whatever the case may be. I may not be able to do, Spark, or something like that.
Sure.
Certainly could do SQL, but you know, there are things that I can do to be productive and help the team. So if you can find some work to do along with it, rather than just asking questions, you can pick something up and then bring it back to the team a week later. I do try to do those things rather than just ask a lot of questions to folks that are going to be naturally nervous that I'm digging into their area. And I try to tell them that's not my intent. And I think the
Mm-hmm.
more you do it, the more people know it's not about, trying to eliminate the team or whatever, the fears, I guess they are. It's just trying to, stabilize the business and for me to become a better, supporter of them, which means a lot of decisions come to me. But if I can't represent the team and understand the things that they sort of know are good or bad and why they're bad, because there's many reasons why things aren't optimal, without just being I don't want to be the McKinsey, come in, do a report after talking to people for a month, make a bunch of assumptions, and they go, this, throw it in the trash. Like none of it's applicable to here because they don't understand the context of why we are where we are.
Yeah, that's interesting. You seem to be the kind of a leader that obviously you value being in the trenches with your people. You value
At
being able
times.
to, at the right times. You're right.
At
There needs to
times.
be there needs to be a balance there. And it sounds to me like you're also very cognizant about culture. And I'm curious, talking, when you're in the trenches, or even when you're not in the trenches, when I think about leadership, one of the key skills any leader has to have is communicating with their team. And like you said earlier, having those conversations and reassuring the team that, hey, I'm not getting the details here because I'm poking around to undermine anything or trying to I'm legitimately trying to learn and to help. So I'm curious, how do you ensure at a broader level effective communication with your team, your organization, to balance out and make sure that you're also driving a healthy culture, the culture that you want to flourish?
Well, one, partly I've been lucky in the organizations I'm in. They weren't significantly dysfunctional. So I think that high stress situations bring out bad behaviors, even in myself. So I try really hard during the highest stress. So probably the highest stress situation for anybody in my role is some type of very visible, impactful outage,
Right.
right? And
Mm-hmm.
everybody's been on them if you've been in tech, and large teams or large calls, or even highly impactful things that you're doing at 2 in the morning, 3 in the morning.
Right.
I think when I first started here, I came for a 3 a.m. They were actually going to touch the cores for the first time in a couple of years. And I said, well, I'm coming in. They're like, you don't need to come in. I said, if something goes wrong, I'm the first one you're going to call anyhow.
Hell yeah.
Why wouldn't I just be here for the meeting?
Yeah.
I think that
That's
put people on edge. I don't know why, but I was simply,
hmm,
so there's things I can say uh, multiple times. It's not going to offset the fears of anybody by me saying I'm just asking
right.
questions. They're all going to say, everybody's going to say that. So that I can take aside. I can still have that communication, still be consistent with it. I think the proof is like when things go real sideways, how do you act? Um, it can't be who made this happen on the call, I'm going to fire him. And I have heard, and unfortunately in IT, we have a lot of leaders that lead in a manner of, I don't know why they think it's a fear-based thing, or when something goes south, I want to know who did it. I'm not
Yeah.
looking to search. I'm looking to know what was done. And the other big part is I really drive, or I say all the time, I want action over analysis in that
Mm-hmm.
moment too. And I think that, just making decisions quickly, and I don't care if they're right or wrong, we're making decisions. Too often, everybody wants to be really careful in those situations versus driving action over analysis. So I think if you can be consistent, you can be calm. At the end of it, we're just trying to find ways to get better. You're not looking to, now if somebody does something egregious and they're doing it, that's almost criminal. If they're trying to bring down your company, I don't think anybody typically does that. That'd be a different scenario. Thankfully, I haven't had those situations, but everybody's well intended. They may make a human mistake. The question then is, why do we have a human making that decision in the first place? Where are our controls? And how do you handle that conversation? I think is important post the event. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and I think then that will gain the trust of people if they know that you're just not out to get the folks or to find somebody or, fire them. I've heard that in the past where people have done that on calls at companies I've been at.
Yeah. Yeah. Me
That's
too.
just not, it's not effective. It's certainly not effective for the broader communication and trying to gain, not even, you ultimately want to just gain the respect of your teams. If you have a little bit of more, they're never going to fully trust you. Hopefully they'll respect you enough where they can give you and tell you the real story of what's going on. I'm always shocked by why people feel they need to hide certain details when it's just work. It's
That's
something
right.
that's been around 10 years. Like we're all accountable to the current environment in some way, shape, or form.
This is true.
but we're more accountable to actually changing it and getting it to improve. And if you don't want to be part of that, then I have a problem with it culturally.
Right.
But I also don't like, why are you like, give me the bad news. I'd rather have all that as much as I can. Then we can start dealing with it.
Well, and to your
People still
point,
seem to be shy.
yeah, and bad news doesn't age well. So why don't we
No,
just
it
get it
doesn't
out
age
there
well.
so
I
we can
try
deal with
not to.
it?
Yeah, I try not to do bad news myself. But
Yeah,
sometimes you get busy. I get it. But bad news ages very, very poorly,
that's
as you
right,
know.
man. That's right. So I was going to ask a bit about managing failure. I think that we've already covered all of that, and I got
Okay.
just some great nuggets of wisdom out of there. So thank you. I do have another question around leadership. I'm curious, when it comes to making difficult decisions, you've mentioned, outages and things like that. There are other, obviously, situations where you're going to be under extreme pressure and having to make decisions without complete information. And I'm just curious, how do you go about managing or making difficult decisions, especially when the stakes are high and, you're under pressure?
I think it's still the sort of the mantra I just mentioned before: action over analysis. So there's a time for analysis and there's a time for action, and I think having that gut capability to work through that, I
Mm-hmm.
think, is what they look for in leaders. A lot of people are very scared. Well, I don't want to hit that button. We don't know what that button's going to do. We're already in a situation. And so
Right.
somebody's got to make the call to hit that button, or to do this back out, or to fail forward, and I've
That's
never
right.
had a problem making those decisions. One, we're very smart people, very good teams. Um, but sometimes, I always say, just action over analysis. We have to do something,
Mm-hmm.
especially in high pressure situations. And most of the time, you won't get it 100% right, but you'll get close. But if you wait, you miss your opportunity, or you
Right.
extend your timeline for resolution by a day, or you name it.
Well said.
So some of it's just having good gut. I don't know how to necessarily coach or teach that. You either find out if you do or you don't, and then you got to
Yeah.
be, accountable for that. I'm never going to go back to somebody and say, well, because you answered it this way, I made that decision. So and that decision then cost me a problem. That's not, I mean, they're giving me the information they have. Ultimately, if I'm making the decision, I need to stand by that decision. So,
Right.
I think you got to have some backbone in those situations, of particularly when they don't go well. Like, why did you make the decision at that time? Well, here's
Yeah.
why I made the decision. And you hope that you have more of those that work in your favor than don't. And again, part of that's probably just some luck, but a lot of it's just, a little bit of gut. After being in many different situations like it, I think you get less stressed
Mm-hmm.
than you do before. Everybody talks about, like, what stressed you 10 years ago wouldn't stress you at all right now. So to
Very
me,
true.
being in those emergencies and going through those components, I've had some very, very, very critical business things that have happened that are, really, really, really critical. And thankfully, those have calmed me down. They stressed me out during the time. I didn't sleep. I'll
Yeah.
stay. There'll be a bunch of sleepless nights. I still have those. They're just for very different reasons. So my hope is eventually I'll be able to sleep, but I don't know if that's just retirement or not, and I won't have as much anxiety at night. And did I say that right? Did I make the right decision? I don't second guess myself. I do, but I
Sure.
still stand by the decision. But I will second guess myself for 2 weeks. Particularly if it didn't go
Yeah.
well,
I
like
hear you.
what, so that's a neuroses thing that I imagine a lot of people have, but tons
Nothing
of
wrong with that,
anxiety
man.
as
Yeah.
well. So, you know,
Excellent. Hey, Bart, do you mind if we switch gears a little bit and talk tech?
sure.
All right. Hey, so obviously this is the world of AI that we're living in right now. I figured, why not talk about emerging tech? I know you guys have a lot going on with artificial intelligence. You mentioned Hadoop earlier and so forth. So I imagine you've got a number of different emerging technologies. I'm not trying to lead the witness. We don't have to talk AI if you don't want to. But just from an emerging technology perspective, what do you see as having the most significant impact on your industry over the next 5 to 10 years?
Well, maybe we'll start by, and I will get to your answer, but maybe we'll start first. I mentioned it before, and I'm not trying to be counter technology revolution, but I do, and I have learned. I feel hopefully enough. I try to manage. So I call it manage the hype cycle, and we've had emerging either processes or hype cycles before, and so part of me says, hey, what can I learn from the past? And even though it's an entirely new challenge that is being solved by technology, are
Mm-hmm.
there fundamental components of that cycle that I can manage better through? And then I'll get to where my mindset is on AI. So coming out of school, obviously there was a big mindset shift when everybody went from waterfall to agile. I mean, that was pretty significant. And you remember everybody, then they get in the camp that agile will solve everything and that you're stupid if you don't do it. And we need coaches. And it got
Mm-hmm.
completely out of control. And that's not really the intent of what was done. And then it's overused and, everybody markets to it and how that whole cycle goes. So learned a
Right.
lot in that during that phase. Certainly a good proponent for it, but I'm a practical person too and would never be a coach or anything like that. It's how you deliver software in the right context for the right types of problems. I don't know if necessarily every problem would be solved by that simple methodology, even with the engineering discipline that
Mm-hmm.
it brings, which a lot of people throw to the side and just try to act like Scrum is a thing. And that's not what, those guys wrote it for. There was a lot of engineering discipline on automating the supply chain of software. Then you get into outsourcing and well, everybody can just code and you can just push it off to a labor arbitrage and people had to manage through that hype cycle, particularly those that were in the leadership positions within tech.
Mm-hmm.
And what did that look like? And how much repatriating was there? And what is the right use case? And at the beginning, it was everything, right? Everything.
Yep.
Uh, Fast forward, there's like four more I'm missing, but like even the cloud, I mean, a lot of people, saw the cloud and said we're going to be no longer in data center. We're going to, push every application to the cloud, regardless of lift and shift or re-architecture. And
Yep.
we'll hit some gongs on the way and post it and be real excited. And a lot of CIOs and CTOs planted their flag on that. That was how they
That's
got
right.
hired as a CTO. The CIO was, oh, they know there are our infrastructure and they don't know anything about the cloud. We'll hire a CTO that knows the cloud, and then all of a sudden their OpEx is out of whack. It means absolutely they get no efficiency gain by going to the cloud. They certainly have a more costly endeavor as it relates to their P&L.
Without a doubt.
They have a staffing issue as it relates to skilling and understanding how to do the work because it doesn't get rid of all your infrastructure staff, quite the
Yep.
contrary. So,
Very
when I
true.
start looking at things, and it's not that I'm always saying all those have very positive outcomes, all of those can be very impactful to the business if done the right way. And so to me, although I get excited about technology, I'm also always trying to understand what's the pragmatic way to go about it so we don't burn a bunch of dollars. We don't do a lot of wasted exercise only to come back and catch us 2, 3 years from now. How do we, and it doesn't mean we need to be slow, but no different than the cloud. And I was saying hybrid from the very beginning because the cloud's not commoditized yet. It could be,
Mm-hmm.
it's not particularly
It,
for companies that have large data assets, and certainly for a company like OCLC coming in and just sort of saying, guys, I know you're excited about the cloud. It doesn't make a lot of sense for a good portion of the business here unless you want to increase your cost by almost
could not agree
65%.
more.
And
Yeah.
there wasn't a lot of appetite for that, right? So
Yep.
now
I hear you.
every commercial you see is hybrid. I mean, everyone, IBM, all of them, they were not doing that 5 years ago.
This is true.
So for AI, I think it's extremely promising. RPA was the other hype cycle, if you recall.
Yep. Oh
Pre
yeah.
LLMs, everything
Mm-hmm.
was going to be robotic process automation. Basically, we've been doing automated stuff like that in tech for 30 years. We call it test automation. We apply it to our
Mm-hmm.
systems. It tests through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of regression tests. All of a sudden, I guess if you apply that to a production system and are doing something from an email and putting it in Salesforce, it's called a robot and robotic process automation. And all of a sudden, it was going to solve the world. You go and spend this cloud spend at $400,000 for two robots to do this stuff for a 100-person customer service desk. it does 5% of their work. It doesn't get rid of any costs, and it added $400,000 to your bottom line.
That's right.
You haven't seen a lot of the return on investment. You see a lot of cool technology, and you certainly see an uplift on remedial tasks being managed by those robots, but it's just as brittle as test automation in many cases.
I would argue much more.
Yeah, even much more brittle. So it breaks all the time. And now you're doing it in a production environment, which, can have consequences on customer support, on revenue, other things. And now you got to have a whole team managing, regardless of all of it's in the cloud, all of it has to be managed by folks that know how to keep it running, know how to keep it extended. And it's very, very little citizen developer-ish and that whole, thing, which is really not taking flight, and I don't see it taking flight on any of the platforms that I've seen to date. So long-winded, but when I get to LLMs, I think there's a ton of promise, certainly more than RPA. But I think also that a lot of folks right now, I see everything's like there's no scale moment right now with LLMs in particular. Certainly there is with machine learning. We've been doing things that people would probably identify as AI within OCLC for a very long time, very advanced algorithms, machine learning with the latest craze being LLMs. But everything's a linear cost component, and almost even shoots up in some instances. The larger data set that you're accessing and the larger pool of individuals that want to access that data access in a short amount of time. So if you're hitting an API, it's a linear cost. It doesn't matter if you hit it 1 million times, 100,000 times, 10 million times. It's never going to give you a price point that's different. When you start looking at the compute that needs to support running through and processing through, not just the vectors that may reside in LM, but then actually get you a response time is significant, and it's almost all cloud-based. If you're really looking at least the commercially available LLMs.
The big ones.
You get into the same sort of issue that you get into that quickly arose with everybody hitting the gong and going to the cloud is if you're just experimenting stuff, you could burn through $200,000, $300,000 like that very quickly.
Yeah, very true.
So I think the big part is trying to, you need to allow some level of experimentation because ideas don't get generated unless people can play with the technology. The good thing is that a lot of people can play in their consumer life with this technology. So there is some familiarity there. But if they're going to start playing with proprietary information, you got to create your own private environment. You got to lock it down. They can then, maybe add their own documentation there. You got to index that. How many users do you have? And again, that's all a cloud check that's going to be cached. And, that bill is going to come in every month.
Right.
So we've taken in multiple different areas of looking at how do we put in a better governance structure. We're still in that learning journey. How do we identify use cases that we think would be meaningful? Some of them are simply to get something out there to show that you're part of the industry. Let's be honest, there is a lot of that pressure as well. But mostly what I'm looking at is then what can we do as this landscape starts to change? I think tying yourself into a particular cloud is problematic in this space. Every other month, somebody else is leading it, right? Right now, it's somewhat Anthropic and,
That's right.
with their third version. But, several months ago it was Gemini. Before that, it was ChatGPT. Then it was ChatGPT again.
And they're going to continue. It's going to continue to leapfrog each other. I agree with you.
Yeah, you got Amazon Q, which just launched a pretty big release with Anthropic. So I think, what we're looking at is how do we step back and go, okay, we do have these cloud environments. We have stood them up for experimentation. We've done some product pieces with LLMs, to get some sizzle out there. We probably have more that we need to do in that space. But how do we look at an effective way to budget and manage this? But also, how do we look at, since I am hybrid, how do we look at lower cost ways to actually generate use case development? My big concern is that a lot of these use cases, we have an idea, we don't know how good they're going to be, but they literally cost $100,000 to run through a use case, maybe over 3 weeks, maybe over a month. Yeah. They're not cheap. It's not like $10,000 here, $5,000 here. And they add up because everybody's got ideas.
Yep.
So how do you, and you only got a certain amount of budget, at least you want to stay within a budget realm, not just, come back to the CFO after 6 months and go, we spent $1 million. Well, what are we going to get for that? Well, nothing. We were just experimenting.
And to your point earlier, about these large language models running in the cloud and so forth, like think about AWS Bedrock and so forth. you're not even going to know unless you have like a strong FinOps practice and you're managing and you're watching
Yeah,
your costs. You're not even going to know until you get the
very
bill.
difficult.
Yeah.
You may know after a month, but that month, that could be $30,000 to run
Yep.
the compute.
Yep.
You know what I mean? Particularly if you're hitting like API based, you're right. Like in the private environments, you sort of know what you're standing up as far as
Mm-hmm.
the compute for it because you're doing it. OpenAI, you know how big of a box you're running off that
Yeah.
privatized. But if you're using somewhat just all you can eat service, at times
Yeah.
it can really catch you very quickly.
Have
So
you guys?
we built our. Go ahead.
I was just going to ask, have you guys started looking into? I know you're looking at a lot of the, the LLM solutions that are available in the hyperscalers and so forth. But have you also looked at some of the open source stuff that's going out in Hugging Face? Because there's foundation models,
Yeah.
there's
So
small models that you can run on commodity hardware. You can run them on your laptop. Obviously, they're going to be
yeah.
much less
So
powerful. But just curious how what your thoughts are on that.
No, and I was just getting to that. So
Okay.
one of the things I think you're going to need. There's a couple things I'm looking at. I don't want to provide their names because when I've been asked them, although I'm sure they'd love their names announced in a podcast. But there are some tools that I'm looking at that are really agnostic of the cloud that could do both cloud and open source. And I do
Mm-hmm.
think open source is going to be an interesting play, particularly in LLMs. So look at Anthropic as an example. You get Claude, look at Llama, all the advancement there. Now, we've done a lot of those evaluations, particularly on the code development side. We've done both open source as well as the commercial ones and the
Mm-hmm.
co-pilots. We're
Yep.
just trying to find ways to help improve the productivity of the development team and help take
Right.
some of their sort of remedial tasks off their plate. We're finding that most of the embedded stuff is a little bit higher quality than any of the prompt-based separate environment stuff. But to your point, we did some pretty interesting use cases just with the Mac. But what that drove us, particularly in our search, there's some open source LLMs related to language translation. There's some due to topic extraction for metadata management. So there's some really neat stuff, and we were able to do some pretty cool use cases without any power. And we just actually stood up our first 4 GPUs,
Hmm.
probably maybe now 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago, where we can sort of start to understand if we do this at scale, what would it mean? Because for us, if our customers are using search, and I use a commercially available search component, we get billions of searches a year,
Oh
billions.
yeah.
There's no way I could, even if that was 1 cent and I was using OpenAI, we don't have the revenue for that.
Mm-hmm.
So if there's things that I can do that look at, what type of capital expenditure I could take with these GPUs, what type of processing power would it require for the user base, what type of response time, because they're going to be more patient with the response time if they're opting into a beta for 47 languages being translated on the fly than they would on a regular search. Are there real use cases where we can leverage an LLM to bring significant functionality but not break the bank as it relates to our OpEx expense? So, and then with that, we're trying to find sort of that IDE, if you will, to run pipelines and build pipelines quickly. Because the other part of supporting a lot of use cases is it's not significantly difficult work, but it's not trivial, and it's still work. Every different environment you need to build for somebody for a different data set to get it up and running for them secure, even
Mm-hmm.
if you have a footprint, even if you're doing it within the cloud. And that takes engineers to support. And, I can't do 60 of them. So how quickly can the tooling, there's some pretty neat companies out there that I'm looking at and where they literally could, I could go point it to a new LLM, the same data set, builds a pipeline, and it's done very soon. I could go look at the results and say, is it better than what this is? That to
Hell
me
yeah.
is where I think the market's going. Now, obviously, AWS say we'll do that with Q, and they have a marketplace, and then you're stuck within their marketplace. We're a big
Mm-hmm.
Snowflake shop as well. They
Yep.
just came out of beta release for their open market where they do allow some open source. They don't have connection to all the commercial ones yet, but so we're trying to land on what platform would be good. Snowflake's very intriguing just from the standpoint of its ability to manage compute, which is the biggest cost that you're going to have in running some type of response through, whether it's a vector database and then hitting the LLM or vice versa, in order to get a response time that's efficient enough.
Right, right. So you've talked, within the sphere of, well, in fact, through this entire conversation, you've talked a lot about managing the hype cycle. And when you're looking at these emerging technologies, It's really interesting to hear how, you're looking at it through all these different lenses. It's not just the technology, it's not just the capabilities. You're also thinking about how can I identify use cases to provide meaningful value that have the right ROI. So, you're also looking at it through a very critical financial lens. Getting back to the hype, AI is in it. It's every day there's a new headline in the Wall Street Journal. Every day there's a new headline that our CEOs, our board members, and everything are reading. In terms of like managing the hype cycle, are there things that you wish that businesses, our business partners and boards understood better about technology?
Well, I mean, I think that they're smart people. I think they can read somewhat between the lines that, they're during these type of transformative technology eras that some people hop on it very quickly and rightfully so. Like on the consumer side, as an individual, like our CEO is tremendously well versed in AI. So I think it depends on. He's not an outsider looking in. He's going and using it in his everyday life. And then understanding the differences between the consumer model and the enterprise model is where then we spend time on, hey, the compute, this type of stuff. Here's what it does. I'm not against it, but this is a very costly use case for this type of outcome. So how do we find good business metrics? And himself, my board, and the CEO or all CFO are all in line with that. But certainly know that there's effort and investment that are needed in this area, because it's going to, those that are on at least the front end of that and can do it in an efficient manner are going to be, those that stick around in this economy. We just know that it will play a part, no different than those other components played a part. The question is how big a part, what's the dollar, what's the use case, what's the integration? So to me, it's just more about education, and sometimes I'll get very technical, to be quite honest, and that's probably not as effective. Sometimes you just go that route and they're like, okay, stop. Great. What does that mean? And, or you're not affecting, but sometimes I think some of the things require some technical understanding. Finding that balance is always hard, so that they can understand why you're pushing back from a cost perspective, or from an early adopter perspective, whatever it may be. I don't think you're ever going to move fast enough for the business who wants to move fast, but that's no different than IT every single day that I've been in. So it just gets heightened around these components where they're hearing this person's doing that, or this doing that, or your competitor pushes something out. So you're going to have a lot of different market pressures, and it's not like you're standing your ground. You should move and pivot where needed. But I also don't want to get in such a pickle that it creates a financial burden on the company. And I think too often folks in my role feel like they've been charged to move fast and then go somewhat loose on the cost side. Well, you told me to go fast, and that cost isn't a problem. And well, it's not a problem until they see $1 million bill in 6 months. Like, then it's a problem. And so I think some people take too much leeway, and then almost like they were given the authority to do that. So I try not to do that, but I also try not to do it in such a lockdown way that we're also not trying to innovate. But that's a balance, and sometimes you gotta manage that, because you're going to get beat up no matter what in these roles, because the environment's moving quickly, companies are moving quickly. You got every speaker and management consulting company and everybody else acting as if they've been doing AI for the last 4 years and they don't even know how to do a pipeline. So there's going to be a lot of pressure out there, because it becomes the thing to talk about.
Agree. That's very, very well said. Thank you, Bart. So one thing before, I think we're running out of time. I want to be respectful of your time. So why don't we start to wrap it up? The one thing I did want to kind of go back to really briefly, for all of the folks who are listening who might be RPA developers, or companies that are considering the use of RPA. I know we talked a lot about, we kind of boohooed on RPA a little bit. I agree, they're definitely brittle, but I do still believe they are a very powerful enabling technology. And there are things that you can do, to your point earlier about looking holistically at these solutions. There are things you can do to to mitigate or even eliminate much of that brittleness, not developing RPAs that are dependent on a user interface that's designed for
Correct.
humans and
APIs.
can change. Yeah, just using APIs, exactly. So those kinds of things. So I wanted to throw that out there, throw a little bit of love out there to the
Yeah, I'm not.
community.
I mean, yeah, I'm not trying to downtrot. I'm just saying that from what was being evangelized as
Right. Yeah.
the margin impact on every business was that you were going to squeeze out 20% expense out of your entire operation, and all that would go to the bottom line with this RPA implementation did not turn out to be true. And I'd love to see a company that did do that. I'm all ears because I'd love to know how they solved it. It's the same thing that I've been asking around with a lot of people that say, "Oh, we use AI, and we only need 1 out of every 5 developers now." And I'm like,
Right.
really? Like, first of all, I don't want to get rid of any developers, but show me how I can make them 5 times as effective.
There you
I'll
go,
pay you to
man.
come into my organization. What's the consulting fee? And then they go dark, right?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of broadcasting of grandiose. So to me, RPA, we actually tested out some RPA here uh, for some specific product needs, and it worked, but the cost alignment wasn't there.
Hmm.
But would have been pretty
Interesting.
impactful for us. But the cost alignment didn't meet up. It
Yeah.
was worth more than what we would get back from it, and that's just maybe it won't be in 3 or 4 years. But I'm a big fan of these types of implementations, even cloud, where we do both cloud and on-prem. I just think they have to be used under the right context with the right solution and actually be a
Agree.
margin improvement generator.
There you
They
go,
can't
man.
just be there for the technology purpose of technology. And too often that's what I see. I see sometimes it's thrown in. I really want to see if I'm going to invest in it, what's the margin improvement? And it's even more important today because you talk about RPA. None of these solutions really anymore are on-prem. None. They're all cloud, every single one of them. Very
Mm-hmm.
rare do these solutions come with an on-prem option. Because of that, it's all an OpEx expense. And that makes you have to tighten your business case mindset.
Mm-hmm.
You have to find
Very
those
true,
dollars
man.
from somewhere.
Yep.
You're cutting a check for OpEx every year out of your technology area. It's probably the biggest cost of the business by far,
Mm-hmm.
outside of people,
Right.
and it's going to be highly scrutinized. So if you're adding $1 million for RPA and you're not getting $1 million at minimum of true margin improvement on the P&L, not productivity gain.
Right.
Great, if that productivity gain equates to revenue, what the CFO is going to look at is how does my P&L look after that implementation for
Well
six
said.
months?
Well
And
said.
the math better make sense, or you're just putting technology in for technology's sake, which sometimes is good and sometimes needed, particularly if you're in something archaic, but it better be understood up front that's going to cost you that much.
Very well said, man. So let's wrap this up. And before we jump into my final question, I want to say that, I've gotten so much out of this conversation. So
Oh,
thanks
thank
for
you.
your time, man. You are a fountain of wisdom.
I don't
And
know about that, but thank you.
no, I'm serious. So here's 6 things I got from our conversation today that I feel like I'm gonna go out and put these on T-shirts, man, because they will sell like hotcakes. Number one, work smart and hard. Number two, expect obstacles. Number three, never waste a catastrophe. Number four, action over analysis. Number five, manage the hype cycle. And number six, what's the margin improvement? So I love that. So with that, what there's lots of folks who will hear this and watch this video and be inspired by you and want to follow in your footsteps, kind of going to where we began. Is there any closing advice that you would give to someone who aspires to following in your footsteps and achieving what you've achieved?
I guess it would. I don't know. I mean, in my footsteps as it relates to maybe becoming somewhat of in charge of technology for a company, regardless of title or role, um, that's typically what folks talk to me about. Because again, they may have that title. It may be something VP of technology, whatever. It may be director, depending on the scale of the company. There's people with lower titles that manage probably even more staff than I do, from a technology perspective. But if you want to,
Sure.
if you want to lead technology, to me, I think you have to find you're always going to grow up in the profession with a discipline in a certain area. Uh, that's just how you start in IT. I think the more that you can figure out opportunities to go outside of that area, and that's difficult to do because a lot of times people want to become an expert in that discipline, and that's great. Um, but if you wait too long, you're never going to be able to traverse and learn and take some other paths, which are um, they're concerning to take. They sometimes are a lateral move. They sometimes require you to change the company that you're at because there's only so much upward mobility. I talk about this with folks all the time, particularly with companies that have a good culture. They're very mature. People stay a long time. We have a lot of that here. There may not be the opportunities for you to progress, and yet you're committed. But sometimes so being open to conversations outside of your current role and be open to doing things that aren't maybe specifically tied to your discipline. Now, you're lucky if that happens because again, there even in today's market, there's a lot of qualified people. So to do that, you almost always have to have someone who's has some level of understanding of your expertise. I think that's where networking becomes so important. Those opportunities just don't pop up and you put in your resume and they look at it and go, yeah, they'd be great to go run software dev when they've been an infrastructure SRE architect for the last 5 years, right?
True.
And so how do you, network and find some mentors, and hopefully you're lucky enough to find like great ones that I've had, and be able to traverse and find those opportunities that you feel would round out your skill set. I think, the more comprehensive of a skill set you have, the more opportunity you have in this space. And there's always going to be some component of if it's technically heavy in this area or it's not, or it's functionally heavy in this area. But if you want to broaden your scope of opportunity, I just had somebody come here who spent like 15, 16 years consulting, very broad set of skills, has never been in-house at a company. And was really questioning whether, and I'm like, well, look, what's the worst that can happen? You come here 4 or 5 years, show that you can run teams, and this person has some teams both internationally and not. You could always go back to consulting, but now you're going to open up a whole range of opportunities for companies that wouldn't have considered you before. But I know the individual. I know what the individual is capable of. And we have a relationship. And I'm more than happy putting them in that position. And some of you are going to go, what? They've never ran a company, been inside a company like Grange or Nationwide or this, that. Why would you hire them? So to me, you have to do that network. You got to get some people to support you in those roles. The hope is they're still in the role when you get hired. I get it. Sometimes it's scary. Things like that happen. And then your advocate leaves. But you got to be willing to take those chances, in my opinion. And then those build on other things. And so it's unfortunate, but sometimes you have to leave companies for that. Unless the company is so big. There's some very large companies where they allow these type of lateral moves. They have all kinds of openings every year, like at Chase, I'm sure, here in town. There's all kinds of opportunity to move when they have 20,000 people here. But if you're not at a 20,000 person company, it may require you to be networked, look at a different industry, look at a different discipline, build that mentorship, build that support system, and then hopefully you go in and you perform, right? Nothing changes that. You got to go in and do the work. And I think that would be at least some advice I give.
Wonderful. That's very sage advice. Thank you, Bart. Fantastic talk. I can't wait to get this out of the community, man.